Welcome to the Good Growing Podcast. I am Ken Johnson, horticulture educator with University of Illinois Extension, coming to you today from Jacksonville, Illinois with a Gardenbite. And on this week's Gardenbite, we're going to talk a little bit about one of the more common pests we find on roses, rose slugs. So roses are grown by many people in their gardens for their large, showy, and usually fragrant flowers. And while they may not be as popular as they used to be, they are still quite popular garden plants. And if you've grown your own roses or you've enjoyed looking at roses, you may have noticed small holes in the leaves or window pane, like feeding damage on the leaves of rose plants. And we often start seeing this sometime mid to late spring and into the summer. When we get later into the summer, a lot of that damage is caused by Japanese beetles. But earlier in the year, this is usually caused by rose slugs. So what exactly are rose slugs? We've got three different species of rose slugs that can be found here in Illinois. So we've got the European rose slug, the curled rose sawfly, and the bristly rose slug. And rose slugs are caterpillar-like insects. But despite their common name and their appearance, they're not slugs, nor are they caterpillars, but they are sawflies. And sawflies are related to bees, ants, and wasps. So these are going to be in the order Hymenoptera. And this will become important when we get into managing these pests. And we often consider them pests because they're feeding on plants. Unlike bees, which are pollinating, and wasps, they're feeding on other insects and pollinating. Sawflies are kind of the group of insects in that Hymenoptera that we generally consider pests because they will feed on plants and cause damage. And they get their common name, sawflies, because they have a saw-like ovipositor, which is the egg-laying structure that they have. And they're going to use this ovipositor to cut slits into stems or leaves of plants to lay their eggs. And like I mentioned, these sawflies, they look like caterpillars. And there's a few ways you can tell a caterpillar and a sawfly apart. So for caterpillars, their eyes are very small and difficult to see. Whereas on sawflies, they have relatively large eyes and they can be seen pretty easily. So if you think about in children's books, stuff like that, caterpillars are usually drawn with these big, visible, easily noticeable eyes. What they're really drawing is a sawfly. And another thing we can look at, that's probably the easiest way to tell them apart is to look at the eyes. Another way to tell them apart is look at the prolegs of the insects. These prolegs are fleshy structures on the abdomen. They look and act like legs, but they are not actually true legs. So caterpillars are going to have 5 or fewer pairs of prolegs, whereas sawflies are going to have 6 or more pair of prolegs. And an easy way to remember that is if they have enough to spell sawfly, it's a sawfly. Back to the ones that are causing damage on our roses. So again, we've got 3 here in Illinois that are typically causing problems. And all of these are going to be introduced either from Europe or Asia. So European rose slug, these larvae are light green. They're going to have orange heads and it'll grow to be about 1/2 inch long. Typically, they're feeding on the upper surface of leaves and they will leave behind the veins or the lower leaf surface. So you can get some of this window painting type damage from them. And they're usually feeding from May through June. When they're done feeding, they're going to leave the plants and they will pupate in the ground and they're going to stay there until the following spring. So we only have 1 generation per year for the European rose slug. The adults will then emerge in the spring and the eggs are going to be laid in pockets near the edges of the leaves. Next, we've got curled rose sawflies. And again, these are green, but they're going to have white spots and have yellow heads with a dark stripe down the middle. And they're going to grow to be about 3/4 of an inch long as larvae when they're full grown. When they're small, again, they're going to skeletonize leaves. And as they grow larger, they can eventually eat entire leaves except for maybe the main mid vein of the leaf. For these, in addition to their feeding damage, when they pupate, they will bore into the twigs of rose plants, particularly those that have been pruned. And this can cause some further damage to the plants. And the reason we call them curled rose slugs is when they will often curl up when they're resting. And for this particular species, we have 2 generations per year. The final one, and probably the one we most commonly encounter, is going to be the bristly rose slug. And these are green, and they're going to have fine hair-like spines on them. And you have to get somewhat close in order to be able to see these. And they'll also grow to be about 1/2 inch long when fully grown as larvae. Again, when they're small, they're going to typically feeding on the undersides of leaves and causing that window pane like damage. So again, only the upper leaf surface is left behind there. And then as the larvae get larger, they can eat larger holes and make it all the way through the leaf tissues there. And if you get a lot of them feeding those feeding holes, they can end up eating an entire leaf except for maybe the large mid vein in the middle there. When they are done feeding, they're going to spin a cocoon in plant debris or sometimes on the rose plant itself. And for these, there can be 6 or more generations per year. And this means they are capable of causing, they can be capable of causing extensive damage, especially towards the end of the growing season, as this feeding damage keeps building up and those populations potentially grow higher and higher. And then the eggs for these are going to be laid in the midribs of the rose leaves. So if you have damage from rose slugs, there's several different things we can do. And again, remember, European and curled rose slugs, we only have 1 or 2 generations of these, so they're only present early in the growing season. Because of this, management usually is not necessary. So this is where identification is going to become important. Again, however, because bristly rose slugs can be present throughout the growing season, again, we have up to 6 generations per year, maybe more, potentially on where you're at in the States. We may need to manage these if the populations become too high. So if you have small infestations, we can remove these by hand picking them, or we can use a forceful spray of water can be used to knock off the small larvae off of plants. And we need to make sure we're getting both the upper and lower undersides of the leaves if we're going to be doing this. If populations get too high, insecticides can also be used to manage the populations. But remember, even though they look like caterpillars, they're going to be related to bees, ants, and wasps. So some of the insecticides we use to manage caterpillars may not be very effective, or something like the Bacillus thuringiensis Christakii, BTK, that only works on caterpillars. So you can put that onto rose plants. It will not affect sawflies. So again, identification is going to be very important when we're trying to manage these. So we're using the proper insecticides in order to manage these. So some insecticides that we can use to manage rose slugs, something like horticultural oil, insecticidal soaps, acephate bifenthrin, carbaryl, and cyfluthrin are some of the active ingredients you would want to look at for managing these. Again, if you do decide to use pesticides, make sure we're reading and following all the label directions. While roses may have limited, if any, pollen, depending on the type of flower you have, it's a full double. But our more open flowers will have nectar and pollen available to pollinators. We want to make sure we're avoiding getting insecticides on flowers, because anything that we are going to be applying to kill rose slugs is more than likely going to kill pollinators too. So again, make sure you're reading the label, following any restrictions that may be on there for applying to flowering plants, because these are flowering. You may want to remove flowers or spray this in the evening when pollinators are going to be less active. But again, there are other things like hand picking or using a strong spray of water to remove these insects off of plants without the use of insecticides. Well, that's all I've got for you for this week's Gardenbite. Hopefully you have a little better understanding of how we can manage rose slugs in our landscape, or if you've got some damage on your rose plants, hopefully now you have an idea of what may be causing it. Good Growing Podcast is a production of the University of Illinois Extension. Thank you for doing what you do best, and that is listening, or if you're on YouTube watching. And as always, keep on growing.